Welcome back to another episode of Timebreaker Podcast. I'm your host, Daniel.
And this is Anthony.
And today we're talking about Christopher Nolan's Batman Begins. Came out in 2005, the beginning of the Dark Knight trilogy, one of my favorite trilogies of all time. And not really like a game changer, but I'd still consider it to be in that freshman class of modern day superhero movies. Would you agree?
I'd say it's more of the start of the modern day superhero movies. I mean, it was really the first one to take the grounded approach, and I would say, especially comparing and contrasting it to the original Spider-Man trilogy, I mean, this was vastly different.
Yeah, and I mean, they all did certain things. I'd argue X-Men did stuff for superhero movies. I'd argue the Spider-Man trilogy did stuff for superhero movies, but this did too. And also, like you said, it just took a much more grounded and realistic approach to not only just Batman, but just superhero movies in general. This was a very different take, although I haven't seen the original Batman, the older films, the first four. I can just tell that this is a very different approach that Christopher Nolan took to the character.
Well, yeah, and even if you haven't watched the original Batmans, I mean, if you just look at other superhero movies during that time period, I mean, you have the Hulk, Spider-Man, Spider-Man 2, X-Men, X-Men 2. I mean, it's very different, and it's definitely a different approach, and I think it's why it caught on to audiences so well.
Yeah, and this was still a pre-MCU time period we were living in, so it allowed for a lot more experimentation. And since we were in that pre-MCU era, you can tell the box office wasn't there for superhero movies quite yet, and I'm sure you got a little bit more info on that.
Well, it's not necessarily to say that there wasn't a box office for superhero movies, because I mean, Spider-Man and Spider-Man 2 made, I believe, $700 and $800 million a piece.
Right.
But at least for DC, I mean, they were coming from 1997's Batman and Robin, sitting at 238 million worldwide, and then Batman Begins came out and made 373 million, and they had roughly the same budget. So for Warner Brothers, this was a win, and I think that just goes to show the difference in the two.
Yeah, and I think that's just a huge just credit to Nolan and what he brought to this. You know, he came in after doing, I'm pretty sure Insomnia was his movie before this, and then he did Memento right before this. So not huge movies, although he was still working with big talent and leading actors. But this was something on another scale that he had never done before. And I think how involved he was in the creative process, he writes the script, he's very involved in everything he does. And just bringing that new, fresh, grounded take to this character and to this story really just kind of revolutionized, in a way, the superhero genre.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with that. He was fairly not pretty unknown at the time, and then he released this, and I mean, he really got his name out there because of this film.
Yeah, I mean, because we hadn't had a Batman movie in several years, and just because this was just a different take on it, and even too, the way the story is told, you can totally tell it's got that Chris Nolan writing style because it's not super straightforward. I rewatched it recently, and we have lots of time jumps and flipping between eras and lots of use of flashbacks, and it kind of just, to a normal person, it kind of would seem a little jumbled up, but the way that Nolan interweaves these scenes together just makes it flow so well and keeps the pacing really, really strong throughout the beginning of this movie.
Yeah, and I'm going to totally agree there, where, the first time I saw this movie, I was probably, I don't know, 6 years old, and so the plot was not very straightforward for a 6-year-old, and so it just felt like a jumbled mess. But then, the older I got and the more times I rewatched it, the more I appreciated the way the story was told, understand why it was presented the way it was.
Yeah, and for me, believe it or not, my first Christopher Nolan film that I ever watched was Interstellar in 2014. I had never seen any of these Batman films, and when I heard he did The Dark Knight and stuff, and how much acclaim those movies got, as soon as I saw Interstellar, I was like, I need to go back and watch these films. And being that old and knowing kind of a little bit about film and watching these for the first time at that age was such a treat, because it was so refreshing from like the MCU stuff that I was constantly seeing, or any of the other like the Amazing Spider-Man films around that time. Like this was something, even for its time, just so fresh and different and mature, for a superhero movie.
Wow, yeah, that the time period in which you watch this movie, I mean, yeah, it's very different having that be your first experience when you had so much more like exposure to different superhero movies. But like for me, this was my first Nolan film, and then actually I think after that point I just watched Batman Begins and it was Dark Knight, and then I might have watched Inception between the two. It wasn't until later, like after Dunkirk came out, that I saw his previous films. But Batman Begins was my first Nolan film, and at the time, he was fairly unknown, and I was too young to care who the director was. So it's just something that, like, I grew up, I knew who he was because of his Batman trilogy.
We got masters behind the camera. Wally Pfister is the cinematographer here. He got nominated for an Academy Award, and even just the way that this film is shot too, like some of those scenes when he goes in the Batcave and those super wide angles are just super, super jaw-dropping.
Yeah, I would totally agree. The Batcave is pretty great, and I like how they've used it throughout this whole trilogy, and especially the way they start using it in later films. But like, getting to see a brand new Batcave after the original Batman films was kind of cool.
And to me, like, just it goes to that whole like realism. Like everything is like grounded in a realistic approach in here. Like it's an actual cave. Whereas like if you look at kind of like the Snyder DCEU version, it's kind of like it is a cave, but it just feels like a really like high tech, underground layer. Where this feels like it was the cave first, and he kind of built around it, not like it's the layer and they kind of just made it a cave.
Yeah, I totally agree with that.
And we got amazing people behind the camera, but let's also talk in front of the camera. Like what do you think of Christian Bale as Bruce Wayne?
As Bruce Wayne, I think he's absolutely brilliant. As Batman, it's not that I've seen better or worse. It's just the fact that I feel like once you're Batman, I mean, they're two very different personalities, and I feel like Christian Bale actually did a really good job of capturing the difference between the two characters. And it's not to say that the other ones were bad. I think that Michael Keaton did a good job, and especially Ben Affleck did a good job at showing an older Batman. I think everyone who's played the role of Batman has shown a different version of how to show Batman.
Yeah, I totally agree. Like we're not getting like a rehash every time. Everybody's kind of like offering their own take, or even like upcoming Robert Pattinson, we're gonna get a much younger at Batman, it seems. So I think that's cool how they're keeping the trend there. But yeah, I think he's a really solid Bruce. And even like when they're doing like all the time jumps and how they're just like messing with his hair, like like his age stays the same, but it's crazy. Like I guess the hair and makeup and just like his performance, you can tell how like there is an age difference there in the performance, even though it's just the same. It's just Christian Bale.
Yeah, there's definitely a maturing. I mean, you start with him as a child, which is obviously played by another actor, but then it moves to him, I believe, coming back from Ra's al Ghul.
We see him like he's like an outcast, and he's like going from prison to prison, so he's older. But we also get like flashbacks of him coming back like from college too.
Right, and I'm sorry, that was what I meant. And so, like, you can tell that this is a different Bruce, and then you can tell that he's matured, like, later on, and, I mean, it's really cool how it's set up.
And then how he moves into Batman, I love how menacing and kind of, like, scary, and the whole deal about this trilogy in particular, it's not just a superhero, it's not just he's Batman, it's about being a symbol and, like, the legacy and what the Batman means, and I think they play to that theme really well, and he creates a larger than life presence here, and just the way it's almost like when Batman's like operating, it's almost like a force of nature in these films to me.
Well, and I think it's really cool how the first time you see Batman in this movie, they really took the approach to how they filmed it as you're really in the eyes of the bad guys, and then, like, it really made it like this really tense horror scene, having a guy dressed as Batman coming to get you.
Oh yeah, like for sure. And it's also, to me, like just a testament to the storytelling on display here. Like we don't really see Batman as like Batman for like 50 minutes of this film, and it's still great up until that point.
It's interesting that a lot of people mention things like that, movies can go so long before something X, Y, and Z happens, but it really goes to show that you don't need Batman to be in his outfit to have a good movie. And I think, especially when we talk about Dark Knight Rises, it'll definitely expand upon that idea.
Oh yeah, for sure. But and it's not like that's just a bunch of dead space in that first 50 minutes. We got lots of, well, I mean, of course, there's lots of exposition dump, and but we get to see like the training and like how he goes to the League of Shadows. Lots of cool montages and introducing Ra's al Ghul and their relationship, and also like his relationship with his father and his parents, and lots of sprinkled in details here and there that just really help build this world within these like flashbacks in this earlier first act of the film, if you could say.
Yeah, and something else about this movie that I think just really completes the experience is Hans Zimmer's score to this movie.
Oh my god, yeah.
And not only to this movie, but this whole trilogy, like, it's trademarked with that signature sound that I think if you had chosen any other composer, I think it would have been a vastly different movie.
Oh yeah, for sure. And I've seen like behind the scenes stuff of Hans Zimmer talking, and he's like, the first thing and like the entire thing that the score is based on is just two notes on a piano. It's like that it's like that build, it just keeps going back and forth, and how they can form this entire theme and film score around those two notes is just super, super impressive, and it just fits Batman so well.
Right, and especially coming from, the original score, I mean, it's vastly different, but in a good way, and it helps to create this unique signature that this is a very different Batman from what you watch in the 80s and 90s.
Right, like that old sound is super classic and fits the character, but again, I think Hans Zimmer's score again aligns with Christopher Nolan's approach of like a more grounded and like visceral approach to the character and to the story of Batman.
And I think that when we go talking about Nolan, up until I believe pretty much after Batman Begins through Tenet, he was using Hans Zimmer, and the only reason he couldn't use Hans Zimmer for Tenet was because he was working on Dune. So the fact that Nolan liked his sound and thought his sound brought his vision to life really goes to show, because he brought him back for every subsequent film he did.
I mean, even just to give credit to Hans Zimmer, because he's my favorite composer, like, he works well with Christopher Nolan. I mean, even when he's not working with Christopher Nolan, where we're talking, Blade Runner. I've listened to the preview for the Dune soundtrack. That is amazing. Anything even Last Samurai, whatever Hans Zimmer touches is
gold.
He
also did Pirates of the Caribbean.
And he did Lion King. Like, this dude's a legend.
Yeah, I mean, it's crazy.
Actually legend. But another thing I do like about this film, and what kind of separates it, this trilogy at least for me, from other like film superhero films, or like even like especially like the Raimi Spider-Man trilogy, is the side characters. Like, it's really easy to have like one note side characters, that just have like one thing to do, but I feel like every side character in this film has like a little arc or a little personality. Like, they're a little bit more three-dimensional than the average side character, in my opinion.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. But if we're going off of side character, he's kind of a main character, having Gordon the way he's presented in this film is just amazing.
Yeah, like, he's like a good cop, that's still trying to do like the right thing. Like, wow, like everybody's super corrupt in the city. Like, that's a really cool story. I think Katie Holmes, Rachel, she's like this idealist assistant district attorney. I don't know the official name for the position, but she's like a prosecutor that still has hope that there's good in the city. Or even Morgan Freeman, he's got a lot of comedic bits in this film, and I mean, we love Michael Caine as Alfred, of course.
And I mean, it goes to show that there's so many side characters in this movie, but I don't ever feel like really any of them got sidelined or anything. My only real gripe would be that I feel the way Scarecrow went out was kind of lame at the end, but the build-up was really good.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like that is definitely a thing, and I mean, if you really think about it, this movie has like 4 villains, and it's almost like a 4-act structure, if you will, because like it starts off where he's going through the training and we fight the first Ra's al Ghul, the one that we think is Ra's al Ghul. And then we come back to Gotham and he has to take out Falcone, the crime boss. And then once he takes care of that, then we're on to Scarecrow. And then we deal with Scarecrow, and now it's, surprise, surprise, the person at the top is the real Ra's al Ghul, played by Liam Neeson. So, I mean, it's a big task pushing all these 4 villains into this one movie, but I feel like they each build upon each other and kind of evolve Bruce Wayne's Batman character throughout the film as we go along, knocking him out.
Yeah, I agree with that. And, I think Nolan did a good job in choosing the villains he chose, because I feel like if he had chosen Joker to come out in this film and you started your first Batman movie with Joker as the villain, I just don't think it would have worked. I mean, especially after seeing The Dark Knight Rises, not Dark Knight Rises, The Dark Knight, I just don't think it would have worked in this movie. At least not the version of Joker Nolan wanted. And I could tell because of the fact that at the end, they do tease the Joker. Like, you could definitely tell that was where Nolan was wanting to go. But obviously even he thought this wasn't the right movie to do it.
And I'm really glad that he chose to not do it, because I feel like that rivalry between Batman and Joker is so rich. Also having to squeeze in the origin of Bruce Wayne and Batman into that film would have just like kind of taken away from it. And I also feel like the at least this incarnation of the character, the utilization of Ra's al Ghul and how influential he was to the training, was a lot better choice to do for the main villain than the Joker would be for the origin movie.
Yeah, I mean, it really gets behind how Batman knows how to beat the crap out of people compared to the originals, where you just go with it. He can beat people up, and he's been a thing for a while in the original films. Where in this one, they definitely went from the bottom and built him up to a superhero, to a point where he is a hero of the city, but he's not at his full potential yet. And I don't think you see that until, like, I don't know, halfway through The Dark Knight.
Yeah, I'd agree with that too. And I mean, yeah, like you said, we get like that whole formation, like when he's talking to Morgan Freeman's Lucius, and like he's like, "Can I get this gear? Can I get this gear?" We see the, how he's growing the arsenal and building everything up, and how the suit's coming together. There's even that one scene where he first recruits Gordon, and he's wearing just like a ski mask and has a stapler for a gun, and where it's like not there yet, but kind of just like the first incarnation of Batman. So I do like seeing how that progression happens over the film.
Yeah, I also agree with that.
Do you think there's any like weak points of the film? Because I know like the really big thing is to criticize it to The Dark Knight. Part of that's unfair, but
I feel like if you look at this film and you're simply comparing it to The Dark Knight, one, I think it's unfair. The Dark Knight doesn't have to reintroduce Batman. You know who Batman is come the second movie, so you get to eliminate that. So now your main objective is to define the villain, and that's precisely what The Dark Knight did. And not only that, but The Dark Knight did exactly what Batman Begins did, where it was kind of, while there's two like low villains in Batman Begins, there's 2 main villains, and their conflicts, come together, and he does the same thing to Dark Knight, but he does it a little more stealthily, I feel. And so comparing, one of the greatest superhero movies of all time to an origin movie that has to pretty much deal with the fact that it's an origin movie, I feel it's unfair.
Yeah, totally. And I think as an origin movie, it's one of the greats, at least for me.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree. It's a pleasure to watch every time, and I think the cast nails it. And I think if different casts had been chosen, a different composer had been chosen, heck, if there was even a different director, but they had the same, composer and actors, I think, we'd be looking at a very different movie. And I don't know if we'd even have gotten to the trilogy we got.
Yeah, I totally feel the same way. And just, I feel like this, we talk about a lot about how like The Dark Knight, it's a darker approach, everything went super grounded and realistic, and every movie after that for a long time, or every trailer wanted to be like a Dark Knight trailer, and it wanted to be like, oh, this is the Dark Knight of X, this is the Dark Knight of Y. But I feel like we don't give enough credit to Batman Begins for setting that tone and approach for these kind of more dramatic and grounded ways of filmmaking and for these big superhero films.
Yeah, the tone is definitely set here in Batman Begins. I'd say if we're talking about how dark the film is, this one's probably like an 8. The Dark Knight definitely kicks it up quite a bit, and
Yeah, for sure.
it's the darker of the two movies, but it's not that the darkness came unexpectedly out of nowhere, and I've appreciated having a darker tone on DC movies because I'm not really looking for Marvel's like this lighthearted approach to storytelling, and DC has mostly just been darker themes and stories. And when Warner decided to go the opposite route later on, when they were trying to compete with Marvel, I mean, Batman never should be a cracking jokes with the team type of hero, and I think that's something that Nolan understands. I mean, Batman's not cracking jokes. Like, he's saying things that might make the audience laugh, but he's not a jokester.
Yeah, I feel that. I think we get kind of like some comedic bits here and there, with Alfred or with Lucius, sometimes Gordon, or even like when Bruce Wayne's being a little douchey, because he's got to put on that act. Like, it's fun here and there, but it's definitely like a more serious film, which I tend to lean more towards. And like you said, the darkness didn't come out of nowhere for The Dark Knight. Like, we definitely get some kind of scary moments here. Like you said, when we first get introduced to Batman, it's almost like a horror movie, how he's picking them apart one by one, or even when we get those hallucinating scenes, with Scarecrow. Like, those are some pretty edgy images, I gotta say there.
Yeah, and it's really surprising that, this movie came out about a year before Superman Returns came out. And I mean, they're two very different films, and one was pretty loved by everyone, and this one was fairly well received, and Superman Returns got a pretty mixed to positive reception.
Yeah, I think that just goes with the character and like the approach, like a lot of people say like DC's always got to be like super dark and grimy and everything, but I feel like you got to take it like with whatever character you're working with. Like, for me, like, I really like how light and fun Shazam was, and that's a DC property, but like you said with Batman, I wouldn't want that same treatment with a Batman film.
Yeah, and I mean, I think it's kind of what some people get confused about is that DC doesn't have to be all dark. I'm fine with having a, fun, laughable, fun time Suicide Squad movie, but I don't need a fun, lighthearted Batman movie, to be honest. Like, it's just, it doesn't fit with the character. And it's like when you make a Justice League movie, like, you can't have a fully lighthearted movie because you're dealing with one character that is fairly dark. And I think that tone turned people off because they don't associate that tone with Superman. And while that's correct, people also just don't like adapting to different styles. I mean, if they made a Batman movie that was cracking jokes, if it works, I'd see it.
Yeah, I mean, I totally give it a shot. It's all about the execution, I feel like, and the way that this movie executes its Batman and its vision, I think, is like super, super superb, and does a really great job at that. And I mean, it is like early. I mean, it's 2005, so I gotta give it some slack. There's some like sketchy CGI with like the train, or when we go to the Narrows, like some of the exterior wide shots are, I'm like, yeah, that's totally a CGI model of a city, but you just gotta kind of live with that, I guess.
The best way to look at this is as a cinematic piece. This is Nolan's step into the ring with the big movies. And while granted, Prestige was a smaller film right after this, The Dark Knight wasn't. Inception wasn't. The Dark Knight Rises wasn't. Every movie he's made since have not been small films. And I feel like he got a taste of it in this one. And he's a very innovative director, which is why he brought IMAX footage into The Dark Knight. And he has been the person, how James Cameron has been pushing 3D, Nolan has been pushing IMAX because he loves that aspect ratio and being able to use that high resolution camera to capture images. But I feel like if he hadn't been given the opportunity to direct Batman Begins, who knows where he'd be today? Would he have ever gotten a chance at, a bigger film?
Yeah, that's actually like really crazy to think about. Like, there'd be no Dark Knight, no Inception, no Interstellar. I wouldn't be that into movies. Like, it'd be kind of crazy.
Yeah, for sure. And, without him, the IMAX the IMAX I love today probably wouldn't be around because really no major films were being shot with IMAX cameras until The Dark Knight. And that's not to say no one would have recognized that, oh, this might be cool to do. Like, would they have executed it the same way? Because I've seen IMAX movies where it's not, done respectfully. But Nolan
Right.
is very respectful of the extra aspect ratio. And I feel like he formats it properly, which some studios and directors have issues formatting correctly because they don't think of it when they're shooting.
Yeah, and I mean, definitely like without him like experimenting with the medium and stuff, we wouldn't have it, or maybe not have it as soon as we would have for, the big event films for the Avengers, like Infinity War and Endgame.
Yeah, for sure.
But going into like the end there, we get this sense of like, how Batman doesn't kill. He's got that final fight with Ra's al Ghul. And to me personally, rewatching this film, the way the bad guys plan, they're poisoning the water, but it's only poison if it gets inhaled, and then they have like this microwave thing to microwave the water so it evaporates and then it gets into everybody and everybody goes insane. I really admire how we're not doing a huge CGI army battle with a sky beam for the third act that most superhero movies do. I do like how, let's say, smart the bad guy's plan is and how it's kind of different than most. I do appreciate that unique take.
Yeah, I think it also just comes with when it was made. I mean, those big CGI armies. It's not that they didn't exist. I mean, we had Lord of the Rings, but they weren't what we have today. They weren't CGI fest for some movies. And so, yeah, having a grounded, understandable conflict that the villain's trying to accomplish definitely helped this film in its ending.
Yeah, and I mean, even if we want to talk about like the CGI army battles, I mean, we kind of get something like that in Dark Knight Rises, although it's not CGI. It's just literally just a bunch of people fighting in the street. So
yeah, I think there's a big difference between when it's a big scene with a lot of people compared to a CGI battle. I mean, there's definitely some more depth to it that you're lacking when you just go full CGI. I mean, it really just depends on the way CGI is done.
yeah, and I feel like Nolan does it really sparingly. And for me, who's like a film buff and consumes these movies like so much, I can watch a Marvel movie and just spot the green screen out the wazoo. I really appreciate his take to practical effects and how grounded he makes everything.
Yeah, I do as well.
When you're seeing The Dark Knight Rises and you see like those hundreds of people like duking it out in the streets, and every frame it's like a real person, it just feels so much better. Where, don't get me wrong, I love the endgame fight at the end, but like I know that nothing is real in that endgame fight.
Well, I think it's just two very different ideas.
Right.
But yeah, the way that he defeats his first villain, while probably not to what people expected, I feel like it's a very cheap way of getting around the no killing rule. I mean, he didn't kill him, but man, he let him die. Like, he didn't even try. So
Yeah.
it's really sketchy. But like, the villain borderline accomplished what he was gonna do, and it's very rare for movies to do that. And I mean, Nolan then does the exact same thing in the second one, except the villain did succeed. And I mean, yeah, I mean, Nolan's just a very interesting director and writer.
Yeah, and I feel like the villains throughout this entire franchise are pretty solid, versus like a MCU track record for villains. Right? And even, I mean, while I'd say maybe Ra's al Ghul might be the weakest of the three, I still think he's a really good job. I really like Liam Neeson in the role. And we get to see that because he has a lasting impact on Bruce, and even reprises himself in Dark Knight Rises.
Yeah, I think Liam Neeson really just steps into the role, and I think without it, don't think we would have wanted him back into Dark Knight Rises if he hadn't have been as well captured in this one.
Yeah, I just feel like Liam Neeson just brings that presence and authority, and that from that like mentor trainer role really well. We saw that as him as Qui-Gon, and we just love him in that kind of role.
Yeah.
But overall, I think this is like a really solid entry for Nolan into like a bigger Hollywood space, and also really awesome reintroduction to the character. And it's a great movie. It sets up lots of stuff for itself and does it in a really interesting and unique way by use of manipulation with time. But it also, like I said before, does a really good job at setting up the future. You know, we get that teaser with the Joker, and we get some drama at the end there with Bruce and
Rachel.
I don't know why I blanked on her name. And then we get the bat symbol sign that they end up using later on in the franchise, and just really cool stuff. And I'm really excited to talk about The Dark Knight next week.
Yeah, so am I. But you know, I feel like this movie's just underappreciated for what it is. I mean, without this, you wouldn't get the future movies. So, you know, I feel this movie deserves more love.
Yeah, I do too. Like, I think, like, it's really popular to crap on Dark Knight Rises, but it's not popular to lift Batman Begins up, and I wish we can change that.
Yeah, what a shame.
It just lives in the shadow of the Dark Knight, which is really sad.
I mean, almost every superhero movie lives in the shadows of the Dark Knight except for Logan.
Yeah, that's going to be a fun episode too.
And that about wraps it up, so we'll see you on next week's episode where we discuss The Dark Knight.
All right, catch you guys later. See ya.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Timebreaker Podcast.
If you did enjoy, please be sure to drop a like and subscribe, and make sure to ring that notification bell for new episodes every Wednesday.
See you next week.